Sagittarius, and I just miss the connection that I had with y'all on YouTube versus Substack. Don't get me wrong, I'm still posting, and things like that there, but it was a different kind of energy, and I feel like I was able to connect with y'all more. So I'm back, and we're going to be talking about the eighth house, the origins of the eighth house in astrology. Now, when I do make my return, I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently this time around. Saturn is in Pisces right now, on the ascendant, so it's kind of making things a little bit more Saturnian in the sense, and not Saturnian in the what we would call the restrictive way, more so like a chrysalid way, right? Going through the chrysalis stage, if you will, and also referring to that Saturnian energy of talking about like the old traditions, the old ways of doing things, and things like that. So I wanted to start with the eighth house. Of course, we're in Scorpio season now, and not only are we in Scorpio season, but we have Venus in Scorpio at this moment. So I wanted to kind of, I've been doing a lot of research. I've been diving in a little bit deeper. I've been really feeling that energy of getting back to my origins of like when I first started astrology, and that feeling that I had when I first started and was doing a lot of digging. So moving forward, we are going to be talking about not only the basics of astrology, like we'll be diving deeper into like the aspects, because we never really got to talk or touch on that, the degrees, different symbology, so the symbols and things like that. But we'll specifically also talk about astrology in not only an evolutionary way, but an ancestral and transformative way. Okay, so you already know what it is already, so I'm checking in, checking out, or checking in. So it'll kind of go something like this over the next couple months. So we'll start with the eighth house. We'll start with the origins, and then next week we'll talk a little bit about the root work. And then the next week we'll talk a little bit about, the week after that we'll talk about like what the eighth house looks like through each sign. Okay, so we'll break it down each house. So next month will be, when we get to Sagittarius season, we'll be in the ninth house, and then the 10th house, so on and so forth, and things, and just the scope of what that looks like. All right, also too, before we start, I just want to say year ahead pre-orders, because we'll be talking about 2026. I'll have a live class that I'll be doing with that. You can find that information down below. So if you want to know what is going to be going down with the astrology, I know it's my first time ever doing this. If you want to know what's going down with the astrology in 2026, you can definitely check for the links down below. And then also I'll be doing rising sign astrology, so you can also pre-order for your specific rising sign and talking about what it's going to look like for you specifically for 2026. All the information down below. But let's go ahead and get into it. Enough talking. Let's talk a little bit about, and then eventually I'll have it'll be PayHip, kind of like Patreon, because I know some of y'all asked about that as well, but not now. I'll make that announcement later. So let's talk a little bit about the eighth house, the origins of the eighth house. What is, first and foremost, what does the eighth house represent? Now, in modern astrology, we look at this house being ruled by Scorpio, which, its ancient ruler is Mars or Pluto energy. But in different spaces, in different parts of the world, in different methods of astrology, the eighth house was actually used for a couple of different things. Now, I will say that it always symbolizes a place of like death, rebirth in its essence, but in different ways. So we have this idea of death, rebirth, inheritances, which usually these inheritances we can see in some parts of astrology where an inheritance of wealth or a wealth transfer was happening in someone's chart, right? So like, let's say you had a grandmother that left you with a home, or a grandmother that left you with, some financials, or you had also even spiritual gifts as well. So different spiritual gifts that were passed down is here as well too. We also have oaths, right? So, I like to talk a lot about like physical contractual agreements, and not only physical contractual agreements, but like spiritual bonds, or the things that you come to make an oath, right, to do in this particular lifetime. So that that life contract also as well lies within the eighth house. We also talk about like taboo interests, transformations, and things. But another thing that I explored, which I did not know, but I just found out, is the eighth house also symbolizes reincarnation at one point in time in astrology, like where you reincarnated from a previous life and you, the mission or the vision that you were actually coming back in to finish, like your oath to this lifetime. So I thought that was really interesting, and I was like, let me share that, right? So yeah, so again, we know this, and we also know the eighth house to be stuff of like the occult, so different occult teachings, occult knowledge, as well. I also when we get to the sixth house, which will be next year, when we get to the sixth house energy, we'll talk a little bit about that, because these houses definitely have a tie together as well. In intimacy, right? We talk about sex, but we also talk about intimacy and emotional, like deep emotional bonds here with the eighth house. All right, so that's a little bit about the eighth house in itself. Now, when we talk about like the themes, we have different themes of like, I tried to dig in a little bit. I always want to dig into like the Comesian or Kemet. Hellenistic also was not only the Greek side of things, but I also learned that it was also intertwined with like Mesopotamia and also places in the Comesian Egypt. Now, I know that there's different, Egypt and Comesian text kind of went by a different way, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll touch a little bit on how they kind of went about. They didn't really have houses per se, but we'll touch on that a little bit more. Now, an ancient thing that they did back in the day as well too, what they referred to the eighth house as well, is the house of ritual. That was another. My door just come. My door did just open. Hello, whoever just came in. The house of ritual was one. Speaking of, and then rites of passage was another way. It was also like when you were ushered into adulthood from childhood. You could also see this here with the eighth house, like the change or shift when you were going into adulthood and seeing, and like I talked about, generational passing of wealth and things here. Then we also seen with this energy, with the eighth house, like I said, I would say Egyptology or Kemet cosmology, the Egyptians or the Comesians focused more so on the movement of the sun and the moon. It wasn't necessarily just specifically houses per se. They, had basically studied the decans more of the astrology and like specific star groups and clusters than they did more so like a house or and things like that, and what governs that specific house, which we'll talk more about when we get to the origins of Gemini, which will be dropping soon as well, because I'm gonna start off with the film stuff that I'm doing, Aries and Taurus, since we've kind of dropped in and did those short film videos and talk about the origins, because we're talking about the moon signs as well, but through film and the essence of those things. If you haven't checked out those already, definitely subscribe to the Substack. But we'll be going deeper into the origins of like the symbolism. For Aries, it'll talk more so like about the warrior's path. For Taurus, we'll be talking more so about, also the pioneering path too. For Taurus, we'll be talking more about like indigenous lands, land stewardship and things like that. And then when we get to Gemini, we'll be talking more so about like divination, and not only divination, but like the study of symbolism and astrology, like how it came to be in different cultures and languages and things. So definitely want to stay tuned for that and subscribe if you haven't already. And then also to share with a friend, comment down below if there's anything that you want to add to this conversation, or if you're enjoying these types of chats and things too. So yeah, so here we have the Comesian cosmetology. Like I said, it's focused on certain star groups and also decans. And then we have the gods also too that were associated with specific days and periods of the year. So this was like the astronomy of understanding the more so than like a house life, right? But it was called per Ankh, the house of life is what it was called, more so than just like these different houses of astrology, day to day, mundane astrology, in traditional astrology in some cases, which leans more to the Hellenistic ideals, which we'll get into next. So the Hellenistic astrology, which I know a lot of astrologers are starting to opt out actually of traditional, or I should say not necessarily traditional, tropical astrology, which is what I'm talking to y'all about now. Western astrology as well. This was the tradition of the horoscopo, Scorpio is what it's called, astrology that was practiced in the late Hellenistic period around the Mediterranean basin, especially in Egypt is another place. It was written sometimes in Greek, but also Latin as the idle place. And wealth was gained in the 8th house, specifically through the house of others. And it was also considered the house of crisis, right? So I also seen when I was reading about it was, it's interesting because now the 6th house is usually where we see this idea of illnesses, but the 8th house was also seen as a place of like chronic illnesses. So these are illnesses that I would say 6th house is more like injuries or like different health afflictions and things. I feel like 8th house is, now that I'm kind of reading about it, making the connection to the two, I feel like 8th house is more like maybe ancestral illnesses that have been passed down from generation to generation, right? This disease, right? The diseases, things that have been passed down from generation to generation, and things that maybe haven't necessarily been fully like, yeah, my great grandfather had da-da-da-da-da, and now I have da-da-da, that kind of energy. So I feel like that's more something that you've inherited when we talk about like the crisis. Also, yeah, which, you know, I might even make a video of the comparison of the 6th and the 8th house in ancient astrology one of these days. But let's just start with, of course, the 8th and things. So this is what you can see specifically in this space here. Now, when we talk about Vedic astrology, all right, and we move to this method of astrology, we can see the 8th house being referred to as the house of sex, the house of death. This is where you can also see sudden, unexpected events happen in your world with this 8th house energy. You can also see not only this, it's translated as the Ayur Bhava, and it's also translated as the house of longevity. This has to do with lifespan, legacies, and also the hidden aspects of life is here. Things that you hide like deep down. Y'all know, like I like to talk about the basement or the attic, and things that you hide or you bury deep down. And yeah, it takes really getting to know somebody to know these like aspects. And we can also look, especially in modern astrology, as the 8th house is like your psychological capacities, like your deep psychological things that you hold deep within the spirit, the body, the things that you carry that probably a lot of people don't really actually know. And when we talk about taboo interests, because some people say, well, what would you consider to be like taboo, or what would you consider to be something that's very off? So I like to look at this, for example, of someone who, let's say, is into what we like to call things like conspiracy theories, or maybe you have someone who is like really heavily into crime scene investigations and blood work, you know, and vampire lore, you know what I'm saying, and things like that. And if we're talking about like an alchemical form of it, which I do look at this for 6th house, and I'll tell y'all why when we get to the 6th house. of the alchemical process, or mystery schools as well. Sixth house. Um, this is where I like to see also too. Also from that sixth house, I feel like sixth house is more. Eighth house is between the eighth house. I feel like in the sixth house are like initiates, like initiatory houses. They initiate things. You know, you have to, you know, you go through and you find the school or you find the teaching, which is that sixth house place or home or school that you belong to or you're a part of. And then the seventh house is, you know, the contractual spiritual agreements, intimate connections and agreements that you make along the line. And then the eighth house is when you really pull all that energy and the knowledge and the wisdom and things like that together. And then the ninth house, when you get there, I feel like that's when you're out of that initiatory school and you go off and you teach that knowledge, or you spread that knowledge, or you know what I'm saying, or you go learn from different cultures and learn, you know what I'm saying, with the knowledge that you got. So that's how I look at the sixth to the eighth house in its scope in itself. In the eighth house, you know, like I think of, for example, like hoodoo, you know, like different ancestral spiritual practices that were passed down or even hidden, right? I've been doing a lot of research about different cultural practices, one is such as hoodoo and voodoo and things like that. And these is where you see, for example, people, you know, in communities and cultures that were banned from practicing these things. So the eighth house comes in and you would see people practicing these things in secret. So people that had churches, you know, when, you know, different times of the hour struck, they would go and practice their own beliefs versus Christianity in some cases, because not everybody was condemned to it, but a lot of cultures were, you know. And that's just one example from many examples of what I mean when I say like this secret underground. I would even say secret societies, it's limited, but I would say we could find some secret hidden societies in the eighth house as well, like brotherhoods and cults, you know. We can look at this in the 11th house as well too, right? This energy in the 11th house, which usually there's a sextile that forms between the 11th house, the 8th and the 11th house as well. Yeah, hold on, let me think. Who I got? No, I'm sorry, a square that forms between the 8th house and the 11th house. All right, I had to think about my own chart. I'm like, wait, what's happening? A square that forms between the two. So there's a connection, tension between these two houses as well as what I think about here. And y'all also, like I said, be sure to not only like, share, subscribe, but tell me in the comments like more of what y'all are thinking about this particular house, or some of the things that you've explored or discovered about, or some things that you find interesting about this house. I notice when I talk about a lot of 8th house things on the channel and things, 8th house, Pluto, Scorpio, anything that's dead, Black Moon, Lilith, like all these moon and things like that, like y'all really be like, everybody really be like in the thick of it and things. That's why I wanted to start off also as well with the 8th house, because I love talking about these topics. I think 8th house is a very, people get scared when they talk or when I have these conversations about the 8th house and these things, because I think it makes a lot of people uncomfortable to go so deep, and not just this idea like, oh my god, I want to get deep, like I want to no, but like really exploring to the depths and back, right, of like these topics that people might feel a little uneasy about talking about, not because it's, now sometimes it might be a little nasty for some people, you know. I think about like, because I think of 8th house also being this penetrative, and not just in a sexual way, but like a penetrative kind of energy once you really start digging in there. And it kind of makes people uncomfortable, like for some people when they watch like surgeries or things like that online, which I think of 8th house as well too, is having to do with like people who who like surgeons or people who get to the thick of the root of it, right? This is also where I would say it all comes up, right? The bottom of the barrel energy, the detoxing even. Yeah, we could say this for the sixth house as well too, because a lot of it does have to do with health and wellness. I would even find root work as well located in the sixth house, which that naturally sextiles the eighth house. And but it really gets to those depths and things, and it really has made me quite curious to know, especially as I'm doing like this deep dive excavation on my own personal chart and myself, and learning more aspects of astrology and branching out in different modes, I should say. I'm really curious to know what y'all think. Like, I'm really curious to know, like, what's in your eighth house, what's going on in your eighth house. Do you have any planets in your eighth house? Do you feel like your eighth house has like some type of effect on the ways in which you share or explore intimacy and connections with other people? Do you have any like certain taboo interests that like really shine through with whatever's happening in your eighth house? Anything with like inheritances, and it doesn't necessarily have to be money, but maybe things that you've gained from previous lifetimes. I would love to know. So please share it down below. Like I said, like, share, subscribe, turn the notification bell on too, so y'all know when I post. And yeah, I'm really, really happy to be back. I hope that y'all enjoy this series. Like I said, next week we're gonna be having what I say. Let me see. We'll be talking about root work. So we'll talk about the eighth house symbolism. We're going back to root work. So what does the eighth house involve in this context, and going deeper into themes of that. And then the next week we'll go through the eighth house for all the signs. So we'll learn a little bit more about that. And like I said, if you would like to be a part of the live course, it'll be via Zoom for the year ahead readings. That will be probably most likely around the Gemini new moon, which I think is like December, someone got hit over there, December 16th or December 19th. But I'll let y'all know that announcement there. So if you want to order to be in that class. And then we have the rising sign pre-order as well. They'll talk about each rising sign and individual videos. I'll have like the little previews up on YouTube, but if you want the full extended video, those will also be up as well. So you can go ahead and check that out on the links down below. And then also make sure you subscribe to the Substack so you know what's popping. It's free subscription. And I'll have more about the kind of like Patreon pay-hip style that y'all can be a part of for real this time. Because like I said, this Mercury retrograde is getting me together, and this Saturn in Pisces is also getting me together. So yeah, I'm back. I'm feeling more refreshed than before, way more refreshed than before, and I have a little bit of new perspective on how I want to move this needle forward. All right, so y'all already know what it is. It's already some checking in, checking out. Without a doubt, I'll definitely see y'all on the next one. Deuces.